It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to this World Leaders Forum event featuring President Nicolas Sarkozy of France. I want to acknowledge our co-sponsors, especially the Maison Francaise, which played a critical role in making today's event possible, as well as the Colombia-Paris Alliance program. I also offer special thanks to the Consulate General of France in New York for helping to arrange this event. I'd also like a very special welcome to First Lady Nicolas Sarkozy. Would you please stand so that we can welcome you? I'd also like, again, to extend a very special welcome to Christine Lagarde, France's Minister of Economic Affairs, Industry, and Employment. I'd also like to acknowledge my wife, Jean Mignano Bollinger, who's here. Today is one of the highlights of the World Leaders Forum series, which has become one of the nation's leading venues for prominent and influential people to address critical issues of our time. Since 2003, this year-round program has featured heads of state from every continent. The resulting range of perspectives and the spectrum of topics discussed in the forum have enriched the already wide diversity of perspectives that characterize this great academic institution. At times, the forum has sparked meaningful discussion and debate here and around the world, which must be expected and welcome to arise from a fundamental commitment to vigorous freedom of speech, the only position the university holds, and it holds it strongly. Today, we are honored to have President Sarkozy, the sixth president of the Fifth Republic of France. President Sarkozy came to the presidency after extensive public service, including nearly 2 decades as the mayor of a Paris suburb, as well as cabinet roles in the national government as both Minister of the Interior and Minister of Finance. He holds degrees in political science and law, and he is the author of Testimony, France in the 21st Century, published in 2007. President Sarkozy holds a very special place in contemporary political culture of France, of Europe, and the world. He is both vigorous and visible, outspoken and intent on action. In following him, one has the sense that he is more inclined than most to express his views as they are, and without regard to the political consequences that might follow. Surely that makes him a delight to us, those of us who inhabit the halls of the Academy. I cannot say what others might think. I do sense he is unafraid of controversy, which is good since his disposition seems likely to generate a lot of it. President Sarkozy is, to be sure, praised by critics and supporters alike for his oratory skill, his charisma, and his determined leadership. President Sarkozy's visit to Colombia allows us to celebrate 2 important relationships, that of Colombia with France and the French language and culture, and that of the United States with France and the French people. Today, there are about 200 students from France enrolled at Columbia, and many of Columbia's students study in France, especially at our historic site in Paris, known as Reed Hall, which we just 2 weeks ago launched as our Global Center for Europe, part of our system of centers around the world designed to facilitate research and teaching on globalization. The Colombia-Paris Alliance program has flourished since it was founded in 2002 with our distinguished partners École Polytechnique, Sciences Po, and Paris I. Already more than 200 students have benefited from dual and joint degree programs under the Alliance. Columbia's Mailman School of Public Health, the School of Art, the School of International Public Affairs, the European Institute, the Institute of African Studies, and many others have very active programs in or involved with France and Francophone studies. Crowning all of these activities at Columbia is the famous Maison Francaise and the Department of French, the top academic department in the United States. In many respects, Columbia is a symbol for the historically strong relationship between the United States and France. Thousands of our citizens work in French companies in France, and just as thousands of French citizens live and work in this country for US companies. As the world's fifth largest economy, as the leader of Europe, as the source of ideals to which we and so many others have staked our collective lives, and as the partner of the United States in nearly every international policy, not least now in Afghanistan, we have much to celebrate in the connections between our respective countries. Mr. President, we are very much aware that you have come to Columbia in order to deliver a major address while visiting our country. We are pleased and proud to welcome you. We also know that you come here at a moment of great uncertainty and even crisis in world affairs. The fragile economy, or the fragile recovery from a near global financial collapse, begs for solutions beyond nations voluntarily moving in concert, almost always a remedy unlikely to succeed. The long-term disaster of climate change poses the additional dilemma of how to overcome the human tendency to short-sightedness. Meanwhile, extremism and its propensity to violence plague our opportunities to build better lives for everyone. Yet unjust inequality and marginalization of populations remain our responsibility to remedy if we are to speak credibly about the potential we see in our political, economic, and social philosophies. And for all this, we are in critical need of a free and uninhibited flow of information and ideas, and yet we are experiencing a rise in censorship around the globe that threatens our capacity to see and think clearly. We are, in short, in desperate need of strong global norms and institutions to guide us successfully through this new century, a fresh leadership on a scale that reordered the world after World War II. Mr. President, you have spoken to all of these issues. And because of your important office, we have listened intently, with admiration at your fearless outspokenness, and we will do so again today. Thank you for allowing Columbia to share in your present visit to the United States. And when you dine tomorrow evening alone with President Obama, would you please extend to him our very best regards from his alma mater, President Sarkozy.
Merci beaucoup. Merci. Alors, je vais essayer.
I'm going to attempt to be up to the challenge of your prestigious university. And the first rule, the very first rule, is not to read a speech. Because speeches kill off creativity. If one comes simply to read a speech, well, one might as well send the speech ahead of time and save time and carbon on the travel. Now, I'm going to speak from the heart, as a friend. Which doesn't mean that we'll agree on everything I say. And through you, I am addressing the great people of the United States, so that you should understand that Europe and the United States of America must work together. In Europe, we are your friends, your European friends. We, in Europe, admire you. You need not worry about that. However, in Europe, what we want is to be heard, to be listened to by the United States of America, that we should put our heads together and think together. You belong to a country that is the world's #1 power, with the strongest currency, the strongest economy, and the largest army. And you have to think about this very carefully, because what does that mean to be the world's #1 power? The world's #1 power, leading power, must precisely be that, a leader. But the world's #1 power must also consider that because it is powerful, that it must share, it must listen, it must discuss, it must exchange ideas and views with others. We are now fully in the 21st century. There is not a single country anywhere on this planet which, in the 21st century, can run the world single-handedly. In the 20th century, that was still possible. At the end of the Second World War, one could imagine a single world power. But in the 21st century, we must all of us understand that in order to rule the world, to govern the world rather, which is now a multipolar world, one has to accept that strength and power means dialogue. It is because you are strong that you can enter into dialogue. In the history of the world, it is only the weak who have turned their backs on dialogue. Now, this is a sea change, this, from that point of view, moving from the 20th to the 21st century. Any single nation, however powerful, however strong, cannot impose its views upon the rest of the world. Now, there's a second thing, of which I am totally certain, and that is that in the 21st century, we must come up with new answers. And these new answers, it is we, the leaders, the heads of state and government of today, and you, the leaders of tomorrow, who have to design them, come up with them. And from that point of view, the crisis that has shaken us 18 months ago affords us extraordinary opportunities. Many, many things have to be redesigned, rethought through. And the third idea I wish to share with you is that if Europe and the United States of America do not redesign this new model, then no one else will do it in lieu of us. That is something you really have to understand. Alone, Europe will not be able to impose its ideas. Standing alone, the United States of America will not be able to do so either. But if we together do not come up with new, fresh ideas, then no one else will do it instead of us. And that is the reason why I'm here, that I have come to the States. And that is the reason that has governed all my political choices since I was elected President of the French Republic. I have wished, I have wanted France to return fully into the fold of NATO. Why did I want that? I wanted that because I wanted a frank, open dialogue with no afterthoughts, with no hidden agenda with the United States. For as long as France wasn't fully within the fold of NATO, when France said something, there was always the suspicion there was something that wasn't entirely right in the Franco-American relationship. Now we're back fully in the fold of NATO. We are your allies. You have nothing to fear from that point of view, nothing. The only thing that I requested of your president, President Obama, was that we could have a totally open, free discussion. Let me give you some examples of this. When we were hit by the economic crisis, and that the American administration simply walked away from Lehman Brothers, what you have to realize is that the knock-on effect was not only felt in the United States, but the knock-on effect was disastrous elsewhere in the world, everywhere else in the world. Now, to say this is not to criticize, it's not to be reproachful. It is simply to call a spade a spade. The world is totally, fully interdependent and interlocked. What you succeed in doing here will be a success for the rest of the world. What you fail to do here will be a failure for the rest of the world. This means that we have joint, shared responsibility. Now, having said that, what can we do together? We admire the American economic model. We admire your corporations, your companies. We admire your universities. In fact, I called for a reform of French university and the French university system, much in keeping with what you are familiar with here, with the only thing is they're not fee-paying. That's the difference. But world economic regulation can no longer stand still. It can't stay where it is. We can no longer accept a capitalist system where there are no rules, no organization, no structure, no regulation. Now, I know that when a Frenchman comes here, he's always a suspect in some way. Isn't he really talking about protectionism, perhaps? Isn't he a bit of a socialist? Is he liberal enough? Is he free trade enough? Well, let me say one thing. By calling for the regulation of capitalism, what I am doing is laying the foundations of that which will save capitalism. The market economy and unbridled capitalism is tantamount to the death of capitalism, because one day people will no longer accept what occurred 18 months ago reoccurring. Let me explain this. That Americans should earn a lot of money, that some Europeans should earn a lot of money, that's all well and good. It's only right and proper. However, you can't win everywhere and on every front. You can't have the bonuses one day and to say no clawback if there's a problem. Now, when the crisis fell upon us, I asked my own team, my advisors, couldn't we have some kind of clawback system in order to sanction all those who brought us to the brink of this disaster? And they said to me, that's impossible. It's impossible to pinpoint who is responsible. I said, oh, very well. So produce me a list of those who were given bonuses when things were all fine and dandy last year, and slap a clawback on them. That is a system we no longer want. A system when all is well, everyone's prepared to endorse responsibility, and when things are going badly, there's no one in sight. Do you get me here? The market economy means responsibility. You can't have people who are responsible when things are going well and you're earning more, and no one responsible when things are going badly and you're earning less. And I would like to pay tribute to the courage, the boldness of President Obama, because at the London G20 summit, we wanted to put an end to the tax havens. But you, the younger generation, have to understand what is the point of giving ourselves rules for our society when you can simply transfer a subsidiary to a tax haven and simply circumvent the rules. Who can understand that? Now, there are hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of Americans who have lost their homes, who have lost their jobs as a result of this crisis. They had nothing to do with it. It wasn't their fault. And yet they are left high and dry. Is this right and proper? In Europe, in all our economies, unemployment is on the up and up. The French Minister of the Economy, the French Minister of the Economy is here. What can we tell the unemployed, who have no responsibility in this, whose fault it is not, and who see that the world economy was shaken to its roots simply because a few hundred totally irresponsible hotheads did mad things on the stock market with derivatives and with other people's money. Do you think we can defend capitalism, the market economy, free trade, when there's so much injustice? I don't think so, because it is impossible to defend. Now, tomorrow I will be seeing President Obama. What am I going to be talking about with him? What are we going to talk about together? One thing, principally and primarily. How together can we ensure that what occurred 18 months ago should never reoccur? That is our only responsibility. 18 months ago, when it happened, we were almost swept away by this tidal wave. Everything was virtually knocked down. And when I see that today the self-same people are prepared to start all over again, committing the same mistakes, I do not want to be an accomplice to aid and abet that. Do you get me there? Is that clear? I don't want it, and I will not do it. Because the next crisis, we, the states, nation-states, are so heavily indebted that we will no longer be able to set up the ramparts, the fortresses, to avoid catastrophe occurring. What I want you to understand is that Europe and the United States of America together can design the rules to stabilize the world economy. It's not a matter of moving from total absence of regulation to excess regulation. It is simply a matter of regulating the market economy on a worldwide scale. That's all. And from that point of view, if Europe can be backed by the United States, then we will win. If Europe and the United States are in confrontation on this, then we will lose, both of us, together. It is Europe and the United States of America that, together, can redesign, invent the new world economy. Now, another example, second example I'd like to share with you, commodities. Oil prices. Is it right that in the space of less than 2 years, oil prices should have moved from $30 a barrel of Brent to $150? One day it's too expensive, the next day it's not expensive enough. Would it not be in our interest for us, economies that are consuming fossil fuels and those countries that are producing oil, to lay down the basis of rules whereby we could have a barrel price at, let's say, $80? Would that not be in the interest of one and all? When the barrel of oil was too highly priced, we would go to see the producer countries and say it's much too expensive. But when the oil prices crashed, we were rubbing our hands with glee. That is not responsible. That is not responsible behavior. I'm talking about oil. I could talk about gas. I could talk about all commodities, for that matter. We have to regulate the world economy. It is our responsibility to do so. Third point. In the room, we have with us Professor Stiglitz, who's a man for whom I have much admiration and a Nobel economic laureate. And together with Jean-Paul Fitoussi, I entrusted them with the task of setting up a think tank in order to invent, and this is of interest to you directly, you students, to come up with new criteria to gauge growth and measure growth. If together we still stick to criteria to measure growth exclusively in quantitative terms, then we will not be able to achieve sustainable growth. We have to gauge the way our economies grow differently, because we're in the 21st century, which is a very different sort of century to the 19th century. What we have to gauge and measure is well-being, education, the cost of our environment. These are criteria that we have to weave in to the way we measure and gauge our economies. If we measure our economies exclusively in quantitative terms and with quantitative criteria, then we will be incapable of availing ourselves of a quality economy worldwide. And there again, we have to show breadth of imagination. We have to understand things. A last example. The market economy is a production economy that creates value. Over the past 20 years, the world economy has become a speculation economy. We have committed to a production economy, not a speculative economy, that an inventor, a designer, someone like Bill Gates should earn a lot of money because he's come up with new concepts, new ideas, and that he made new discoveries, he broke new ground, and he has given jobs to tens of thousands of people worldwide is only right and proper. It is only right and proper that that should be the case, but that people should earn money on speculation because they're basically speculating on whether the New York Stock Exchange is going to go from 5,000 to 6,000 base points is not a system in which I wish to live. And if we live in a system where we are not living in a caricature of the market economy and capitalism, we will in fact be saving capitalism and the market economy. And in order for us to be successful in this, the great American people have to understand that an absence of rule and regulation kills off freedom, that freedom feeds on a minimum of rules and regulations. It enables us to do things that other situations would not allow us to do. If the great people of America understand this and throw their weight into the battle to come up with new standards, new norms and regulations, then the world will avail itself of balanced rules. Another tremendous area where you and we need to work together is new world governance. I was in Copenhagen for the World Environment Summit. And this afternoon, I will be meeting with the Secretary General of the UN. Now, Copenhagen was almost the caricature of the failure of a certain sort of way of going about things. How does it work? We have a UN Security Council with a certain number of permanent members who have a right of veto. But this Security Council and its membership was decided just at the end of the Second World War. Do you know this, you young students at Columbia University? Do you know that there isn't a single African country that has a permanent seat on the UN Security Council? 1 billion inhabitants we're talking about here. Did you know that there isn't a single Arab country who represent hundreds of millions of people who has a permanent seat on the UN Security Council? Did you know that India, that is 1 billion inhabitants, in 30 years' time, the world's most populous nation, that doesn't have a permanent seat on the UN Security Council? That Japan, the world's second most powerful economy, should not have a seat on the Security Council. Why is that the case? Quite simply because 60 years ago they lost the war. Is that reasonable, I ask you? Did you know that there isn't a single country from Latin America that has a permanent seat on the UN Security Council? I mean, honestly, how can you expect us to regulate within the UN framework and deal with the major crises, the major wars, the major conflicts, if we are still in a mindset whereby we think we can do so without Africa, without 3/4 of Asia, without Latin America, without a single Arab nation? Is that reasonable? Does that make any kind of sense to you? Is it even thinkable? I mean, who could believe that? Well, then I'm told, yes, but there's the UN General Assembly. They're all members of that. Well, all very well. That's 192 countries worldwide. So it's the G192. So we move from a system at the Security Council where we want to sort things out without 2/3 of mankind to a system where the last country or whatever country, if they're not happy, can actually veto and block everybody else. Well, the United States of America and Europe together have to demand that world governance be reformed in order to make room for the continents and countries of tomorrow who are entitled to have their views listened to. I mean, how could you expect Brazil or India or Africa, for that matter, to endorse part of the responsibilities vis-à-vis the world's major difficulties and conflicts if they're not even listened to? Would you like to be in their shoes? Would you like to be told, well, look, you have to, when it comes to paying up, step up, but when it comes to speaking up, step down? I mean, who can understand that? Who could go along with that? Nobody. And so, together with Gordon Brown, we have tabled a temporary provisional reform for world governance and the UN Security Council. As French president, I was a member of the G8. And I say, well, the G8, so what? It's difficult to imagine that it actually represents much, because there's not China, there's not India, there's not Mexico, there's no South Africa. I'm told it doesn't matter. We invite them. We invite them at the end of the G8 summit for lunch. We were inviting the 5 representatives of 2.5 billion inhabitants of the world to travel from across the world simply to have lunch with us. And we didn't even see, we didn't get it that one day it would be that G5 that would refuse to invite the G8 to its table, and not the G8 that would refuse to invite the G5. But my dear friends, I don't say this because I'm an advocate for Africa, Latin America, or Asia, although I'd be happy to do so. But I say this because if we don't, I believe we don't change world governance, we don't stand a chance of responding to and being able to manage tomorrow's conflicts. For Iran, where we have to show total firmness, and that must not be allowed to get its hand on nuclear weapons. We need the support of China and Russia in order to agree on sanctions. So everyone has to be on board the world governance ship in order to take the decisions collectively and not get it wrong. The alliance between the United States of America and Europe is of the essence here. Lastly, we are here in New York. New York, a town, a martyr city in 9/11, 2001. No one has forgotten that in the fight against terrorism. All of us need to pull our weight. You need us, and we need you. When I woke up this morning, I heard that our Russian friends, because they are our friends, have been hit by 2 attacks in the Moscow subway. There's more than 30 dead, 2 kamikaze women who blew themselves up on the subway. Do you think there's any difference between the mad people who were killing innocents in the Moscow subway and the crazed individuals who hit the Twin Towers here in New York? I mean, do we make a difference? Do we start picking and choosing and have a kind of ranking of terrorism? No, of course not. When New York was attacked, it was the world's democracies who are under attack. And when Moscow is attacked, it is all of us who are attacked. When faced with terrorism and terrorists, we cannot stand divided. When the American president is in Afghanistan, you know, in France, it's not easy to explain that French troops are dying in Afghanistan. But I tell you this, we will stay by your side in Afghanistan because the fight against terrorism is a fight that we are all of us involved in, not simply the Americans, all of us. Because I do not want the Taliban to make Afghanistan suffer, nor do I want the nuclear weapons to fall in the hands of terrorism and terrorists. Therefore, we need to work together, all of us. And lastly, I will conclude before answering your questions. I sometimes trying to imagine if I were a young American, what I would be thinking. You know, you have a country which is a continent, from east to west, east coast to west coast. You have succeeded exceptionally in so many areas. You have your problems that you must solve, but truly, truly, believe you me, you must never turn your backs on the rest of the world and look inwards. The world needs an open America, a generous America, an America that shows the way, that is attuned to the suffering and expectations of others. You are much loved throughout the world, but there are many expectations of you. And sometimes, when you are less loved, it is because our expectations were so great that we had the sense that we were a little disappointed. When you chose President Obama, the entire world was proud of you. The entire world placed its hopes in you. And I should say that the debate between President Obama and Senator McCain, I felt, was a triumph of American democracy. And sometimes when I speak to President Obama, and I have great pleasure in talking with him, discussing things with him, he sometimes says to me, you know, on certain issues, such as the environmental regulation, I'm a little ahead of what a lot of Americans believe. And I say to him, don't lag, and I say to you rather, don't lag behind your president when it comes to regulation, when it comes to defending the environment, when it comes to listening to others. Because in this world of ours, the world of the 21st century, we cannot afford to have the world's #1 power not being open to the rest of the world. The world does not stop at the East Coast nor at the West Coast. So there, please take this message from a French president who is your true friend, who admires you, and who loves the United States of America. Thank you.
Écoutez, si vous avez quelques minutes.
Now, if you have a few minutes, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Be as open in your questions as I have been in what I've said.
Oui, je vais la faire en français. Monsieur le Président, merci d'être là et de répondre à nos questions.
Mr. President, thank you for allowing us to ask you some questions, and thank you for being at this university. According to you, what are the characteristics that we need to develop in order to here in universities?
Well, the first thing we're going to look at is your autonomous status. That is the most important. For me, a university is a place of freedom. The wealth of universities is precisely based on the freedom they're in. The freedom to choose your professors. I mean, do you realize here in Columbia, you even have French professors? Wow. That just goes to show how free you really are. And my dream is that there should be American professors coming to France without there being an uproar talking about nationalism and protectionism and heaven knows what else. The research programs in Columbia, I looked. It is your board and your scientists that lay these down. It is not up to the state to define the contents of a research program. Now, what was France's problem from that point of view? I think we misunderstood the word equality. Equality does not equate with uniformity. Equality is tailored to the merits and needs of each and every one. What I like about the American model is the way in which merit, effort, work, initiative, audacity are rewarded. That is my first point. My second point is that you can't have a virtual campus. It cannot develop in a virtual manner. And I'm a bit fed up when I see that places as magnificent as this only exist in the United States. I have in my delegation some major French scientists, heads of big, top-ranking schools and colleges. And I believe that you cannot work on tiny campuses with libraries that are shut on Sundays, in buildings whose beauty is considered to be inversely proportional to their state of decomposition. I want to open up our windows and our doors to creativity, and perhaps also to get our campuses and universities to compete with one another and to reward those who do most and more. I also want American students to be able to be welcomed into our universities, and that there should be many French students coming over here. I mean, what is the point of the 21st century? A world in which we can travel freely, if you can't come and study in our country, and if we have difficulty in sending students to yours. That is exactly what we are changing in France right now. Now, change is always difficult, you know. It worries, it goes against habit. But the duty of a statesman is to pursue change when change is necessary. You know, ultimately, I believe that when a politician is elected to office, he's only actually trodden 10% of the road. Many of the politicians who were my predecessors thought that just by getting elected, they'd traveled the road. I believe that to be elected is simply the first step down the road, and that the responsibility of politicians and of heads of state such as ourselves is to be like CEOs of companies. In other words, we should be judged on results of what we achieve and produce, and that is precisely what the university reform we have undertaken in France is all about. Please go ahead. The microphone, please.
It's the French system of health that is considered the best in the world. What is the advice that you can give us to improve the health system in the United States?
Well, you want to get me involved in the American battleground, as if I didn't have enough battles to fight back home. Why, I won't run away. First of all, I want to congratulate President Obama on having succeeded in getting this reform through. Whatever you or I or you think of this reform, the fact of the matter is that he wanted this reform, and he got it. And it's only right to congratulate him on that. Now, if you want me to be absolutely sincere up front with you, sometimes seen from the European perspective, when we look at the American debates on reforming healthcare, it's difficult to believe. We rub our eyes in disbelief. The idea, I mean, the very fact that it should have given rise to such violent debate, that simply on the fact that the poorest of American society should not be left out in the streets without a cent to look after them from the healthcare point of view is something astonishing to us. I mean, we sorted the problem out 50 years ago. Of course it's difficult. Of course it's expensive, because healthcare is expensive. But you can't let people simply die. The government can't simply turn its back on those who don't have the means to go to hospital. Well, I don't want to get too involved, but honestly, if you come to France and something happened to you, I don't know, on the sidewalk, we're not going to be, you won't be asked for your credit card before you're rushed to hospital. Now, what I want is that in the United States, everyone should be able to feel the same way. In other words, that if they've been dispossessed of everything, they've lost everything, they will not be left out in the street, out in the cold. So yes, I admire President Obama for having done what he did. And I said so. At the same time, I have a huge amount of respect for Senator McCain, because I felt that his behavior, he behaved magnificently. You know, by and large, anything that happens in the United States is followed with keen interest in France. And it's right that that should be the case, because it's important that all of us in our country should not be navel-gazers, that we should look at what's going on elsewhere in other people's countries. I've said this time and again, we don't need to reinvent everything. I would like to get my inspiration from what others have done better than us. I love my country, I'm proud of my country, I represent my country, but when you get things wrong, when you bark up the wrong tree, then I don't hesitate to say, let us look at what others have done and let us draw inspiration from that in order to apply it to our own case. That is also the advantage of globalization, you know. So, welcome to the club of states who don't turn their backs on the sick and the poor.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, how do you see the role of Europe given the present economic difficulties? What way do you see out of it?
Well, this has been one hell of a debate. And it took a lot of my time with Chancellor Merkel in particular. Chancellor Merkel, you know, I know that people don't always understand how Europe works, and people get irritated with the way we go about things. But do you realize that Europe is 27 countries, 27 member states, 27 countries who for centuries were at each other's throats, were at war with one another, hated one another, between the French and the German, 3 wars. Between the British and the French, I won't even go down that one. Between the Spaniards and the French, so. Well, between the Italians and the French, it's always been beautiful. Beautiful relationship, n'est-ce pas, Carla? Now, these 27 countries decided, we all decided collectively, to make peace and to walk in the same direction. You know, it's very complicated to get all of that to work, but it worked. Now, within the 27, there's 16 countries who decided, are you listening carefully, that we would have the same currency, And when Greece came under attack, the case I put to my colleagues was not that it was Greece that was coming under attack, but the euro, our currency. Therefore, we had to show solidarity. And I drew a lot of inspiration from what happened here with Lehman Brothers. Now, if we had turned our backs on Greece, if we had let Greece fail, then the crisis would have flared up again. Now, with Lehman Brothers, now, I understand the line of reasoning of Mr. Paulson at the time. Why give taxpayers money in order to bail out a bank that was badly run? Let us simply walk away from them. Now, when you walked away from Lehman Brothers, throughout the world, savers said, so this means a bank can fail and go bankrupt. Went the panic that flared up worldwide, which is why we decided to step in and support Greece. And since we took that decision, my dear Christine Lagarde, spreads, interest rates, and speculation has calmed down. Why? Because speculators are out there like toreadors. For as long as you don't actually build a wall, a rampart, they're prodding us, testing us. But once you say, okay, you're provoking us, here's the money on the table, and they back down. That's what solidarity means. And that solidarity is essential. It's a sine qua non. And last time I spoke to President Obama, in other words, last week, over the phone, because we had a video conference with Gordon Brown, Chancellor Merkel, President Obama, and myself about once a month. Mr. Obama said to me, what are you going to do about Greece? Because he knew perfectly well that stability in the US, to a certain extent, hinged on what we in the Eurozone would be capable or not of doing. That is today's world. That is why, when the decision was taken not to bail out Lehman Brothers, we would quite like to have been sounded out at the time and not simply told about it after the event. That is what solidarity and interdependence means. A last question, perhaps?
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
You made the point that in the 21st century, there needs to be a greater level of economic cooperation between all the countries in the world, not just the countries that are on the Security Council, but that places such as Japan and Latin America don't have any real spots there and that their voices are not being heard. You made the argument that in the case of Japan, they lost the war. It could also be said that Africa and Latin America are not being listened to for the simple reason that in recent history, they were colonies. If the developing world is to have its voice heard in all this new cooperation, what sort of framework do you envision for that becoming the case?
Pour moi, le système.
Well, for me, it's a simple system. Every region of the world must have 2 to 3 representatives on the UN Security Council on a permanent basis. And every region of the world should be able to determine freely the basis on which they choose their 2 or 3 representatives. There again, the world doesn't need uniformity. Let me take the example of Latin America. Should it be Brazil? Should it be Argentina? Should they elect their representatives to a permanent seat? It's up to them to decide. We, the international community, should say, look, what we want as permanent members of the Security Council are 1 or 2 people representing Latin America. Choose them as you will. It can be via elections. It can be on a rotating basis. It can be a huge country like Brazil. I mean, how can you imagine running the affairs of the world without the Brazilian giant sitting at the table? For the African countries, there are some 50 African countries. Should the representative be South Africa, which alone represents 40% of African GDP or the African economy, or a giant country such as Nigeria that has more than 100 million inhabitants? It's up to them to decide and determine it. It is not up to us. What matters is that among the world's 4 or 5, 6 major regions, the B, as permanent members of the Security Council, are people representing all of these regions. And my aim, my ambition is to fast-track this one when France is in the presidency of the G20 and the G8. Might I simply add a last point here, which will be something that the academics might wish to mull over, which is that I'm calling for the establishment of a new international world monetary system. We cannot continue as we are. In 1945, you had the Marshall Plan, Bretton Woods, a few kilometers away from New York, and for a year sat down and thought about what the world monetary order would be up until the end of the 70s, where there was the unpegging from the dollar. But my dear friends of the United States of America, the dollar is no longer the world's single currency. It is a very important currency, but it is not the only currency. The yuan, the Chinese currency, is an important currency. Part of your savings is in Chinese hands. So we have to design a new international monetary order and decide together on how to handle and manage interest rates and how to regulate currency fluctuations. Do you know that between the euro and the dollar, when we launched the euro 10 years ago, some 10 years ago now, there was parity. $1 was €1. Now, the euro went up to 150 against the dollar. How can you expect our companies to withstand this? This is 50% less productivity, or rather competitiveness. How could we withstand that? And in a matter of a fortnight to 3 weeks, the euro moved from 150 to 133 today. Who can understand that? Who can accept that? I mean, how can we still operate on the basis of Bretton Woods as designed 60 years ago? Or is it not in our interest to stop and think about a new international, world international monetary order? That is a fascinating discussion which I will push forward when we're in the presidency of the G20, and something which I will be talking about with President Obama. You see, new world governance, a new international monetary system, a new system to regulate commodity prices, and a means and new ways of regulating the market economy and free trade. That is what matters. That is going to shape the world in which you are going to be living, and that you will not build and design by simply reading the books that lay out the theories of the 19th century, but by coming up with the ideas that we need for the 21st century. The excellent news in all of this is that today, my dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, the world is our oyster. We can reinvent anything if we have the imagination and the cooperation that we need between Europe and the United States of America. Thank you for your attention.
President Sarkozy, let me just say that we're deeply grateful for your coming to Colombia. Thank you so much for addressing the big issues of the moment, and most of all for the generosity of spirit, the warmth that you expressed. Colombia reciprocates. Thank you very much for coming.
Ladies and gentlemen, we ask you to please remain seated while the President exits the building. Thank you.